Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this very short, sharp session for 30 minutes. Tim Baker's my name, and I'm looking forward to spending a bit of time with you this morning, wherever you are. So welcome. We're not going to get a lot of time for questions, but if you do have a comment or question that you'd like to make, then I suggest you go to the Q&A box, and I will keep an eye on that and certainly respond if I can get there during the half an hour. So the end of this recording, I'll send you a copy of the slides and I'll send you a copy of the recording as well. Very much appreciating the fact that you joined me this morning. Now, I think it's an interesting topic because the world that we live in at the moment, of course, is full of distraction. And the great management consultant Warren Bennis said that one of the greatest challenges of the 21st century is the management of distraction. And I think he's right. And so our challenge is not to get distracted, but also, of course, we've got a team and we don't want them to be distracted either. So having a shared purpose is fundamentally important in the day and age that we're living in and will continue to be for forever, really. So I want to share with you a couple of tools that I think might be very helpful for you working in a team environment and how you might keep people on track. So I'll share my screen and we will launch into the presentation. All right, now obviously this comes from my latest book, Breaking the Proactive Paradox, Maximizing Performance Through Empowerment. And that book will be out in a couple of months and you can certainly pre-order that and you'll get that for a discount. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little later. So let's just have a look at what we're going to be covering. Just before I do that, I understand some of you don't know who I am, and that's fair enough. And I'll just give you a quick rundown, if I may. Obviously, I write books. This book that I'm writing now is book number 11. So, I spend a lot of time writing books, and I also spend time, of course, presenting. And you can see that I present. I also, I'm an executive coach, if you like, and I spend a lot of time working in workshops as well with teams and various individuals. And I'm still playing rugby in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brisbane, which is a little tragic, I guess, but nevertheless, that's one of my outlets. So that's a little bit about me. So let's have a look at what we're going to cover in the process. But I think one of the main objections that people would have trying to anticipate this is that there's so many distractions going on in our organization, it is virtually impossible to stay on purpose. I think that's the big challenge that you've got and probably your team members. So that's something that I hope that we can talk about today and give you some tips about how you might overcome that. So what I want to cover is I want to talk a little bit about the proactive paradox, which is a concept, a fairly simple concept, but I've given it a name because you'll be very familiar with it when I explain it to you. Then I'll launch into some strategies around cultivating a shared purpose. And I'm going to focus particularly on a strategy called a team values charter. And I'll give you a heads up on how that works. And you can implement that immediately. And at the end of this presentation, I've got a special offer for you. Okay, so a paradox, of course, we use the word a lot. We hear the word paradox. What is it? It's really a case of what comes first. Is it the chicken or is it the egg? Now, of course, that's, it's difficult to work that out, of course. And a paradox is one of those situations where we're not quite sure where somebody might be, what's the instigation of this. And I want to talk about my paradox, which is the proactive paradox here, which is a pretty simple and straightforward process that I'm absolutely convinced you'll be aware of. Now, what happens is if you look over there on the left-hand side, you can see that at the beginning, when you're leading a team and a team's ready to be led, normally what happens is that the team leader, that's you, probably wants everybody in that team to show independent judgment, to be able to use their initiative in the right place at the right time in the right way. You want people to bring their brains to work. You want them to think out things. You want them to be able to back themselves only when you need them to, of course. Now, so pretty much most team leaders are, would have that view. But also the team members themselves also want to use their independent judgment. They also want to be autonomous. They also don't want to be relying on you all the time. So at the outset of this paradox, both you and your team members are on the same page. Now, something happens along the way. What happens, of course, is that the team leader might speak in a team meeting and say to his team or her team, I'd like you to show more initiative. I'd like you to back yourself. I'd like you to be more autonomous. So they make that comment. A team leader makes that comment in a meeting. Now, all of your team members are sitting there thinking, I don't really think my manager really means that, because I've noticed that he or she gets involved in decisions that perhaps should be decisions that we make. So I'm not convinced that he or she really means that. So what happens is the team leaders, of course, sit on their hands and they decide not to show independent judgment, not to be autonomous, and not to show any initiative because they don't really think the leader means it. Now, of course, what happens is you as the team leader notice this behavior, and you know, of course, that you've asked them to be proactive, and you've noticed that they're not proactive. So, of course, what you do is you jump in and fill that vacuum and do the things that you were hoping that the team would do. Now, by jumping in and doing those things that you think the team should do, the team members are sitting there watching this and they're thinking to themselves, aha, my team leader really didn't mean it when he or she said that we are to be show our independent judgment. So it reinforces the behavior and it goes around and around in a circle. And while we both started off on the same footing, what's actually happened is we've ended up being both frustrated. The team leader's frustrated. They're frustrated because they can't seem to get their team members to show initiative. And of course, the team members are frustrated because they don't think the leader really wants them to show initiative. And this is what I call the proactive paradox. And basically, there are three key stages of the proactive paradox. The first stage is, of course, is agreement. That is, the manager wants team members to show initiative and the team members want to show initiative. So everybody's on the same page to start with. Now, what happens somewhere along the line is there's a communication misunderstanding and skepticism is generated, and the team members sit there and think, I don't think my team leader really thinks that I should be showing independent judgment, even though I've heard him or her say that in a team meeting. And then, of course, the team member feels that they've got to fill the vacuum. And because they feel they've got to fill the vacuum, it pretty much confirms in the mind of the team leaders that really, I don't think my team leader was really interested in me showing independent judgment or being proactive. And this is a problem across all industries. So let me talk a little bit about some strategies. There are basically 4 strategies you can do to break this proactive paradox. Now, obviously, I'm only spending a short time with you this morning. I'm only going to cover the first one, which is shared purpose. But you can see that there are 3 others, and I've got some webinars coming up, which will give you some strategies around boundary management, information exchange, and proactive accountability. So I won't define them at the moment because I want to just concentrate on shared purpose at this stage. But all of them working in tandem can make a huge difference in terms of breaking this proactive paradox that I've just described to you. So what is shared purpose? So let's just be clear about this, because if we talk about shared purpose in a team, what do we actually mean? And I define it as this, that shared purpose is aligning the needs and interests of the organization and the individual. And that is, this alignment of purpose is to stimulate enterprising behavior. So if the team member and the team leader are on the same page, then it gives a degree of psychological safety, and that the team members know that it's perfectly okay to back themselves or show independent judgment. Why? Because they pretty much know what the purpose is. And not only do they know what the purpose is, they share that purpose as well with their team leader. So that's ultimately what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a shared purpose. Now, there are, of course, a number of ways of being able to do this. And I'll just share with you a couple of ways. But as I said earlier, what I'm going to do is share with you the team values charter, which I think is a very powerful way of getting people on the same page. But ultimately, if we're trying to get a shared purpose in a team, the first and probably I'd argue the most important thing that you can do is model the way. In other words, if you're focusing on the important things in the team on a regular basis and your team members can see you doing that, then that sets a very good example for the rest of the team. So, for example, if something goes wrong in your team and you decide to get upset about that and you want to point the finger of blame at somebody because a mistake has been made, and you spend all your energy pointing the finger of blame rather than fixing the problem, then of course the team member thinks that really the purpose of this team is to cover our mistakes and to make sure that mistakes aren't made, to be risk averse. So that sends a signal because you're spending your energy trying to, pin the blame, if you like, on a team member. But of course, if you decided to spend all your energy trying to solve the problem, then people get the idea that really this team is a problem-solving team. So that's one way, and it's a very important way, and it's by your actions that you set the example. Another way is developing a team charter. Now, I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about that, so I won't spend too much time other than to say this, that the team values charter gets everybody on the same page in terms of the sorts of behaviours that you believe are reasonable within your team. Another way to share purpose, of course, is to encourage people and to support them. And I often call these corridor conversations. I don't think it really matters too much in the team meetings because they're set pieces, but in these incidental moments when you're with team members and realigning or recorrecting behavior, I think can make a huge difference. And sometimes we're so busy going from one meeting to the next that when we're interrupted, sometimes we don't spend much time listening to what people say, but they in the corridor are golden opportunities to be able to align people's purpose. And of course, if you're very busy going to a meeting, then the idea would be to just let the person know that when you come back from the meeting, you'll sit down with them and spend a bit of time talking about what they want to talk to you about. And I think feedback is critically important because if you give people feedback on their performance and using critical incidents to, share that feedback, then I guess what you're doing with people is you're giving them a sense of what is, appropriate and perhaps inappropriate in terms of what people should be doing. But I always hear this over and over again that, leaders don't give enough feedback. And I think, if you don't give much feedback, then people don't know where they stand. And if they don't know where they stand, they certainly don't know what the purpose is of the team. So therefore, now there are many others, and I talk about these four in great detail in my book and give you some very practical guides as to how you can do those things. But let me talk about the team values charter because I think it's one that's very valuable, very easy to apply, and one that you could virtually put into practice this afternoon. So let's have a look, see what it's all about. Now, the team values charter, I should say, is something I put together several years ago. And I was very pleasantly surprised at how incredibly effective it is. And we've got teams right across the spectrum who are using a team values charter. So this is how it works. It's quite a simple process. It's an enjoyable process, and it's highly effective in terms of getting everyone on the same page. But ultimately, what you do is when you have your next team meeting, get through your reporting process fairly quickly because obviously you need time to do this. I would suggest to you it'll probably take you about 15 to 20 minutes to do. So it's not a huge onerous imposition on people's time. And of course, the results are really great. And what you do is you ask people to come to a meeting, and you ask people to record their answers to 4 questions. Now, they can obviously type this out or they can write it on a piece of paper. It doesn't really matter, but it is important for them to record it. And the reason for that is that you want them to think carefully about the questions. So a lot of people say to me, well, why can't we get them to do it before the meeting? Well, it's not quite as effective if you do it before the meeting, because the bottom line is some people are going to forget to do it, and then you're going to have to be back to square one. So just do it in the meeting. And the first question that you ask people, and you ask them to write this down. So the first question is, what's one value that's important to you when working in groups and teams? Now, you'll notice that it's one value. So you're forcing people to think, well, how do I want to be treated basically in a team environment? Now, if you were asking me that question, I might say respect. I might just write the word down, respect, because to me, if there was one value that was important working in a team, it would be respect. Now, that's just my value. It doesn't mean it's yours or your team members. So I write that down. And of course, everyone in your team writes that down. And then when you see people's heads come up, you ask the second question. The second question is, what is your definition of that value? Now, we don't want war and peace. We just want people to write down a simple sentence that pretty much explains what that value is. And the reason for that is, of course, if you put any value down, it can mean different things to different people. So the idea is, of course, you get people to define it. So I might say, if you were asking me and I was a member of your team, I might say respect is when people are prepared to listen to others, even when they may not agree with their point of view. Okay, so I've written that down, and others will write down their own values. So I get their own definition. So I get everyone to write that down. And that's important because we need to know what people mean by that. Now, once everyone is looking up, you ask the third question. And this is a very interesting question because it gives you tremendous insight into what your team members are thinking. The third question is simply this: why is that value important to you? Now, if you ask me and I was in your team, I may write down, I like to feel that I'm respected and my opinions are valued when I'm working in a team. That's why I think respect's very important. I want to feel that I've got a voice. So I'd write that down. Everyone else would write their value down. Now, this is important because, of course, it gives you an insight into what people are thinking. And the last question, question 4, is where the rubber meets the road. I'm asking people now, what behaviors would be consistent with this value? All right, because this is really what it's about. I mean, values drive behavior, as you know. And so, of course, if you ask me, I'm going to say things, a few things, but I might say not interrupting someone else while they speak. Simple. To me, if I'm making a comment in a meeting and people are hearing me out, and they're not interrupting me, I'm going to be, I'm going to see that as a sign of respect. So I give everyone a chance to write these down. And when I've noticed that everyone is finished, and by the way, you need to do this as well. Now, you can do this before the meeting because you know what you're going to do. And of course, you're going to get these slides later, so you'll have the questions. But you need to do this because you're also a member of the team. So this isn't the case of everyone else doing this and not you. You must do it yourself. So the next step, once everyone's written these down, is we're going around the room and we're going to ask every person in your team to share with you the answer to those 4 questions. And we start with you as the team leader. Good place to start, setting an example. So you read out your values. You read out your value, I should say. You explain why it's important to you. You explain its definition, and you explain some behaviors that are, important to reinforce that value. Now, I'll tell you, this is very interesting because I've done this across 21 industries, and it's you'll hear a pin drop. It's quite palpable. People really do listen into this. And the reason is obvious, of course, because people are interested to know how other people see, how they see themselves, how other people like to operate. And then what I do is I go round the group and I go round the team until I've got everybody to respond to those four. Now, I like to encourage questions. I like to encourage people to make comments. It's not just static. It shouldn't be just static presentation of each person, but in a lot of cases it probably will be. It doesn't really matter. Now, what I've done is I've now created actually a charter, and a very good one, because what I've done is I've asked everyone how they want to be treated in this team. That's basically what I've asked, which is not a bad thing to ask. So what I've done, and you may find that a couple of people in your team have the same value. So don't worry about that. In fact, it's a good thing. Say, for example, if two people have got respect, you might then say to those two people, get your heads together and come up with a definition that basically fits both of that, that pretty much you can both live with that value. In other words, I want everybody to be included in this charter. So what I've done is I've recorded the answer to question 1, which is basically the value. And what I've also done is I've recorded question 2, that is the definition. Now, the other 2 can be left off the list, but really what I've got now is I've got a value and a definition. And I publish that, and I basically will, I can put that, I can put that in my meeting agenda. I can put it on people's desktops. I can put a poster around the office, whatever it might take. But I think it's important to publicize it, because if you publicize it, it might be, it's something that people can hang their hat on. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, hang on a minute, we've got our values, our organizational values. What's the difference between that and this? There is a big difference. This has got nothing to do with your organizational values. This is just simply values around how your team will work with each other, right? That's the distinction. Now, you might say, well, why will this work when the plaque on the wall doesn't work? And there's a good reason for that. The plaque on the wall was written by somebody somewhere in a room or an office, and when people walk past it, whilst they won't disagree with the values that are there, they probably had absolutely no input, so they don't own it. See, with the team values charter, people own the values. They're values. They're not your values. They're everybody's values. Now, what you've created here is a kind of a framework, if you like, where you can start to create consistent behaviors that lock in with the values charter. So, for example, if I, as the team leader, have found that someone constantly interrupted someone in a team meeting, and I felt I needed to give them feedback about that because the other person really wasn't getting a chance to say anything, then I can then say to that person at the end of the meeting, in private, of course, do you think that, the way you were behaving in the meeting was consistent with the charter, with our charter? Now, the obvious answer is no, because they were interrupting them and respect was on the list. So you see, you've got something to hang your hat on. So obviously you lead by processes, procedures, systems, key performance indicators, and all of these good things. So you've got that going, and I'm not suggesting you drop that, you continue that. But now I've got a set of values, and I, as the team leader, will be the custodian of those values. So as the team leader, I'm going to be monitoring behavior around those values. And that means that what we're going to do is have everybody on the same page. I can tell you for sure, when this is really working well, you'll find that your team members themselves will hold each other accountable for their charter. And that's a good thing. That's what you want to see. That's what you want to hear. So you'll find it works extremely well. And I know this because, as I said, I've applied this across 21 industries. And it only takes you 15 to 20 minutes, and it's an enormously powerful exercise. But bear in mind, if you just go through the exercise and you don't hold people accountable for these values, then obviously it's not going to be, it'll be a waste of time. Just an interesting exercise. But remember, you're not holding people accountable to your values. You're holding people accountable to their values. And you become, as I said, the custodian of the team values charter. So that's a great way of being able to align people's behavior with what you expect in in your team. So I'd strongly recommend that you give that a go. It works extremely well. In fact, I've never seen it not work well. It's an extremely good exercise and highly recommended. All right, a couple of things I want to do before we wrap up today. You may be aware, I know some of you are regular attendees at my Friday webinars, but every Friday I have a free half-an-hour webinar on some practical tip or hint that will help you with your team. And next week, I've got another one coming up, which is called Managing the Boundaries of Initiative at Work. So we're going to cover that, and I'm going to give you some practical strategies on how you do that. So what you can see there, it's next Friday at 10 a.m. And I've even given you the link. So when I send you the slides, all you've got to do is click on that link and you're registered for the next webinar. So and keep your eyes peeled, because I've got ones coming up regularly, obviously every week. So, and it's usually something out of my book. Speaking of which, before we wrap up today, my book, as I mentioned, is coming out in a couple of months, and I just give you a special offer here. The book, the recommended retail book when the book is out, will be $40 plus postage. But if you want to pre-order, and what that really means is just send me an email today. Basically, that's it. Just send me an email and let me know that you'd like a copy, a pre-ordered copy. What I will do is I will then, when it comes out hot off the press, I'll send you a signed copy before anybody else gets hold of the book. And I'll just send you an invoice for that amount, and away we go. So I'm giving you that offer today because if you send me an email by the close of business today, I can arrange that for you. And you'll be one of the first to receive the book. So folks, that's it from me. I'll just stop sharing for a moment. All right, so thank you very much for your attendance, and look forward to perhaps seeing you next Friday, and we'll go through managing boundaries around initiatives. So thank you, everyone. And of course, if you've got any questions about anything that I've covered today, you can get me on email. So thanks, everyone, and I wish you all the best. Have a fantastic weekend, and we'll perhaps catch you next Friday. Thank you and goodbye.